Draco Malfoy and the Depths of the Mind by Draco will hear about this. Chapter 13. Choosing Sides. In the whole chaos between Umbridge, the Dark Lord, and escaped Death Eaters, it was hard to remember sometimes that Draco was still part of a Quidditch team. But as February drew to an end and Slytherin's match against Ravenclaw approached, he was hit with a sudden burst of motivation. Facing the Ravenclaw team meant, naturally, facing off against Cho Chang, and he would not lose against Chang, and if it was the last thing he did, he would walk out of this match victoriously, preferably while making the girl look like an utter fool, and Harry would end up asking himself why he'd ever fancied her. And maybe he'd finally realize he'd been in desperate love with Draco all along? A boy could dream, right? Draco? Hermione told him tentatively Friday afternoon as he packed his books to retreat from the library. He had Quidditch practice in half an hour. Please don't run your head into a wall with this match, okay? What's that supposed to mean? Draco hissed, glaring at her. Just, Hermione sighed. I've seen the way you've been glaring over at the Ravenclaw table this past week, and I really think there's no need for you to get all worked up because of Cho anymore. The date was a disaster. If you ask me, Harry doesn't seem all that interested anymore. That doesn't change the fact that I am going to win against her, Hermione, Draco pointed out. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, Hermione muttered. It's just Quidditch, Draco. In the big picture, is it really all that important if you win a match against Cho? Draco did not answer, but the deadly glare he sent her way was answer enough. Hermione threw her hands up in defeat. Boys! She snapped. You'll never understand Quidditch, Hermione. Draco shook his head, his tone icy. Anyway, this may be my only chance to get back at Chang for ever laying hands on Harry, and I plan on taking it. So kindly shut your mouth and let me do whatever I bloody please. When the match rolled around Saturday afternoon, Draco was hyper aware of Harry in the crowd. It was ridiculous because technically Harry had never missed a single one of his Quidditch matches. He had always been either in the stands or up in the air with him. But today, when he was playing his quasi-ex-girlfriend, the knowledge that Harry was watching seemed to be burning holes into his skin. Chang looked petite on her broom. She had that tiny slight statute that meant that she was light and fast in the air. Perfect for a seeker, really, but Draco knew that his technique was better than hers, as was his broom. They circled the pitch up in the air for a while, searching for the tiny golden ball as the match happened below them. Draco was the first one to catch sight of it as it hovered near the Gryffindor stands of all places. He dove to get to it, adrenaline rushing through him, his eyes focused on his aim. In his periphery, he saw Chang following him, and on the right side, he passed a couple of his own teammates. And then something hit him in the side of his face, and blinding pain shot through his skull. Everything went black. When he woke up, he felt sick, and his head was still pounding, though it didn't feel like it was splitting open any longer. He made a noise of discomfort, but didn't dare to open his eyes. Draco? Harry asked very softly, and his hand was squeezed. Harry was holding it. Where am I? Draco brought out, eyes still shut. In the hospital wing, Harry answered. His other hand came up to very tenderly draw his thumb over Draco's cheek, and that more than anything made Draco's eyes flutter open. Crabbe accidentally hit you with a bludger. Crabbe? Draco snapped, incredulous, and immediately regretted it when his head pounded and his stomach churned. The fucker is on my team! My guess he's not told him to do it, Hermione said, and only then did he notice her presence from the other side of the bed. As revenge for Harry naming their fathers as Death Eaters in the Quibbler. Ugh, Draco groaned, closing his eyes again. He told me he'd get me for that, but I didn't think it would be during Quidditch. He's threatened you, Harry asked rather sharply. You didn't say. Because you'd have hacked them 3 ways into Sunday, and then you'd have gotten another month of detention, Draco drawled. I wanted to avoid that. Harry growled. An actual growl. Now, Hermione said wearily, Crabbe has gotten a fair amount of yelling from his team captain, who's extremely unhappy with his actions, and I saw Professor Snape demanding a word with him too, so I'm sure he'll get his punishment. Harry will let go. Right, Harry? Harry didn't say anything. Harry! Harry! Hermione said rather sharply.
Fine, Harry spat. I'll let it go, but if any of them touch Draco again—
I know, Hermione interrupted him. Draco is precious goods, not to be damaged.
She cracked a smile at Draco, who rolled his eyes, then winced. That hurt too.
Now, Harry, why don't you go get Madame Pomfrey and tell her that Draco is awake? I'm sure he could use a potion or two for the pain.
Harry nodded, anger fading into concern, and he scrambled off to Madame Pomfrey's office. Draco closed his eyes for a moment, sighing. I can't believe Crab's timing, he mumbled. I would have had that snitch.
Oh, come off it, Draco, Hermione hissed, frowning disapprovingly. Do you really think that between all of this, Harry has wasted one thought on Cho? He was down on that field the moment you fell, and he's been at your side ever since. Cho might have caught the snitch, but that doesn't mean she won.
Before Draco could respond to that, Harry had returned with Madame Pomfrey, and he was being poked into a sitting position and cast diagnostic spell after spell on him. All the time, green eyes didn't leave his face, and Draco wondered if maybe there wasn't some truth to Hermione's words. March was already well underway when Umbridge at last made true of her words to use her power to sack one of Hogwarts' teachers. The unlucky one was, thankfully, not Hagrid. Not yet, at least. Instead, she made a huge production out of dismissing Professor Trelawney, one that had apparently even inspired pity in a woman as formidable as Professor McGonagall, not that Draco had been around when it happened, in an attempt to set a sign to the rest of the staff, as Draco could only presume. It had not worked out as you would have liked. Dumbledore had stepped in, reminding her that while she could very well dismiss teachers from their positions, she could not banish them from the grounds, resulting in a temporary pardon for Professor Trelawney in terms of living arrangements. Though why she would like to stay in the castle now that she was out of a job, Draco couldn't fathom. The second thing Dumbledore had done to royally piss Umbridge off was hire a replacement for Trelawney the very same day. Firenze, the centaur from the Forbidden Forest who Harry and Draco had met during their detention in their first year. Draco felt a little gleeful at the fact that Dumbledore had managed to find the one person for the job that would manage to tick Umbridge off the most. Firenze wasn't even a half-breed like Hagrid. He was not a wizard at all. Hagrid, meanwhile, still had each and every one of his classes inspected, and if anything, Draco was sure that Umbridge was now even more determined to let him go. He wished there was anything they could do to prevent it, but for once, there seemed absolutely no way out. It was horribly frustrating. Even if they did have an answer to Hagrid's problem, though, there'd have hardly been any time to work on it. As their owls drew nearer, their workload multiplied, and that, in addition to all the extracurricular work they were doing this year, was giving them no time to take a breath. Harry, though, seemed to be flourishing whenever they worked in the room of requirement, completely in his element, in his role as their mentor, that Draco couldn't really begrudge the time it took out of their schedules. Besides, as he finally watched his own Arctic Fox Patronus run across the room, chasing after Hermione's otter playfully, he had to admit that it was kind of fun today. That was until the door opened and Dobby entered the room. Dobby, who looked awful. The poor elf was shaking from head to toe, big eyes wide and fearful. Draco's Patronus faded into nothingness at the sight, as did Hermione's. "Hi, Dobby," Harry said, bending down to look at him more closely. What's wrong?"
"Harry Potter, sir," he squeaked. "Harry Potter, sir. Dobby has come to warn you, but the house elves have been warned not to tell."
And then he ran headfirst into a wall. Harry and Draco both reacted immediately, meaning to catch him before he could hurt himself, but Dobby just bounced off, thanks to the countless ridiculous wooden hats he was wearing. He was sure they were all of Hermione's making. "What's happened, Dobby?" Harry asked, holding on to the elf this time to make sure he wouldn't hurt himself again.
"Harry Potter, she...
Dobby tried to hit himself in the face, but Draco intervened, catching hold of both his wrists. "Who's she, Dobby?"
"We know who she is, Harry," Draco snapped. "What's more important is, does she know about us?"
The fear in Dobby's eyes was enough of an answer. Draco cursed. "Is she coming?" Harry asked quietly. Dobby let out a howl and tried kicking the floor, as his feet were the only part of his body he could so use to punish himself.
"Yes, Harry Potter, yes!"
Harry got to his feet, leaving it to Draco to restrain Dobby. "What are you all waiting for?" he yelled. "Run!" Draco heard the sound of desperate scrambling, and then Harry pushed him aside, grabbing Dobby. "Go!" he called. "I'll take care of Dobby. Just go!" Draco was about to protest, but the wild look in Harry's face left no room for argument. He nodded and pelted for the exit. He pushed through the door and ran down the corridor. A shadow to his right, and Draco looked up. There was Parkinson looking at him with wide eyes. Draco came to a halt, quite on instinct. Crack! There was a beat of silence. Both of them had their wands in their hands. Then voices down the corridor broke the tension between them. "What are you doing?" she hissed, jaw set. "Run!" Draco gaped at her. Then, without questioning it, he took off. He ran all the way to the owlry, where he collapsed on the bench, catching his breath. Aquila let off an inquisitive sound and flew over, settling down on the windowsill behind him. Draco waited for a long, long time, hoping against hope that Harry or Hermione would come to find him, but they didn't. Then, when he thought the air was clear, he made his way down to the Slytherin common room. Inside, Nott was sitting with Crabbe and Goyle by the fire, jeering as he entered the room. "Malfoy," he called, "look at you crawling out of your hole. Sit down and celebrate the news with us." "I don't know what you're talking about," Draco muttered, his jaw clenched. "Your little group was busted," Nott called, his grin almost splitting his face. "I caught Potter myself on his way out of that room you were using. Dumbledore admitted to everything, and now he's on the run, and we finally have a capable headmistress. Things are going to change around here, Malfoy. Finally." Draco felt like he was going to throw up. What exactly had Dumbledore admitted to? Had he taken the blame for their stupid idea? Oh, Merlin and Salazar, this could not be happening. "I just can't imagine how your poor father must feel." Nott sighed, faking affection, "with his son being a member of a group called Dumbledore's Army. The shame." "His definition of shame and mine are quite different," Draco muttered very quietly. He needed to talk to Harry. He needed to find out what had happened. For a moment he caught the eyes of Pansy Parkinson and Blaise Zabini across the room, but he did not stay around to interpret their gazes. Instead, he bolted toward the dormitories and got hold of the charmed parchment that connected him to Harry, unrolling it and scrambling for quill and ink. "What happened?" he scribbled, hoping with all his might that Harry would get the message. To his relief, the answer came almost immediately. Cho's friend, Marietta Edgecombe, talked. She told them about the TA and about our meetings in the Room of Requirement, and that's how they knew where to find us. But Hermione had cursed the parchment we had all signed, so she now has SNEAK written all over her face in ugly pustules, and that must have scared her, so she stopped talking in the middle. Still, it was enough for them to get hold of me, and to find the list with names of every member. Draco flinched at that. He told them it would all blow up in their faces one way or another, but none of them had listened. Dumbledore then took the blame on himself and pretended that he had given me the order to form an army for him. He fled before Fudge could arrest him. Draco buried his face in his hands for a moment. Then, for want of a better response, he wrote, "Fuck!" "Yeah," Harry replied. Then, after a short pause, he added, "You got away okay? You weren't caught?" "Parkinson got me, but she let me go. I don't know why." "That's interesting." "I know. I don't know what to make of it." "Maybe you do have a few friends in Slytherin after all." "It would appear so." It was at that moment that Zabini entered the dormitory. He looked uncharacteristically tired, and when their eyes met across the room, he paused. Draco cleared his throat. "Why did Pansy let me go?" he asked. Zabini sighed. "It's complicated," he said. "But she was helping Umbridge, wasn't she?" he asked. "She should have handed me over, so why—" "I told you," Zabini interrupted him. "It's not that easy." "Whose side are you?" Draco asked, frustrated. "Hers or ours? The Dark Lord's or Harry's?" "I told you." He rolled his eyes. "I don't do sides. I only protect the people I care about, and in this case, that's Pansy." "Then Pansy," Draco prodded. "Whose side is she on?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Zabini groaned. "Stop asking questions and be thankful she helped you out, why don't you?" "I am," Draco clarified. "Thankful. Immensely. But I'm also confused. Is this going to come and bite me in the butt later? You and Parkinson helping me all the time?" Zabini sighed and shook his head. No, he said simply. Just take it at face value. We have our own private reasons for being interested in your welfare. Draco stared at him. He didn't know what to make of that, but Zabini didn't clarify. He just made his way to his four-poster bed and drew the curtains. Draco turned his gaze back to the parchment in his lap. You were right all along, Harry had written. We should have been more careful about who we trusted. More careful about everything, and now look where it's landed us. Dumbledore is gone.
Draco's heart felt heavy. I'm sorry, Draco wrote. For what it's worth, I wished I had been wrong. Harry took a while to respond, so Draco thought he had already fallen asleep, but when the answer came, it sounded defeated and brought him no joy.
You rarely are. As her first order of business as headmistress of Hogwarts, Umbridge put out a couple of new educational decrees. For one, she formed the so-called Inquisitorial Squad, a group of students she trusted to torment the rest of the school into obedience, namely Nut, Crabbe, Goyle, and a couple of other Slytherins, among them Parkinson and Zabini, though Draco was not sure whether to feel relieved or outraged by that fact. Members of the Inquisitorial Squad were allowed to take house points from fellow students, something that exceeded even the powers of a prefect, and naturally Nut had jeered at Draco about it the moment he had stepped out of the dormitory. I told you, Malfoy, he had smirked. Times are changing, and now if you'll excuse me, I have to find Potter and knock some points off Gryffindor for his ugly face. As a result of the unfair majority of Slytherins in the Inquisitorial Squad, the other houses soon lost pretty much all the house points they had. But that wasn't the only new rule Umbridge forced upon them. By order of the Ministry of Magic, students are henceforth required to attend meal times at their own house tables unless they have a written excuse by a teacher. The above is in accordance with Educational Decree No. 30. Signed, Dolores Jane Umbridge, Head Mistress of Hogwarts. And that had Draco fuming almost more than the whole Inquisitorial Squad disaster, because it was one thing that he had to endure being tormented by not even more than usual, but now he didn't even have his usual refuge amongst his friends during mealtimes, whether it was at their table or during a walk over the grounds. Draco knew why Umbridge was doing it, of course. She wanted to cut Draco off from Harry. Their friendship had been a thorn in her eye from the moment she had entered school grounds, and now she was abusing all the power in her hands to get what she wanted. No wonder his father supported the bitch. Just because Dumbledore was gone, it didn't mean people were taking Umbridge's rule lying down, though. No. If anything, the resistance against her had multiplied, and the figureheads for that resistance were Fred and George Weasley. The twins seemed to have completely lost all fear of repercussions and set their sails with the complete aim to annoy the heck out of their new headmistress and cause as much mayhem as they could possibly manage. Starting with shoving Montague into the vanishing cabinet on the first floor after he tried taking points from them before setting fireworks loose on the entire school, which resulted in Umbridge spending her first day as the headmistress running after explosive fireworks, spelling insults. Draco had to admit he was impressed with them. It's quite satisfying seeing Umbridge run across the school with that wild and harried look in her eyes trying to put out fireworks, Draco wrote to Harry through their enchanted parchment that night, a smile on his face. I especially love how the other teachers don't bother helping. The whole school has formed an alliance against her. It's brilliant. Even the castle is in. Have you heard that Dumbledore's office has sealed itself against her? I have! The castle knows what's good for it, obviously. Draco had barely seen Harry today. They'd had only one shared class, care of magical creatures, but that had been inspected by Umbridge, so they had been unable to talk. And Umbridge had made the Inquisitorial Squad keep head count on the house tables to make sure everyone was present during mealtimes, which made it quite impossible for them to have a proper chat. Therefore, these parchments came as a blessing now. Umbridge tried to question me under Veritaserum today, Harry wrote quite suddenly, and Draco almost dropped his quill. I managed to avoid drinking it, and Fred and George's firecrackers interrupted her interrogation. But you should be careful. She might not stop with me. Merlin! Draco wrote, feeling quite shaky. What did she ask you? Whether I knew where Dumbledore or Sirius were. Crap! Yeah, I mean, even if she slipped you Viverity serum, there's nothing you could tell her. You don't know where either of them is. But still, be careful.
I will, Draco promised. You too. We really, really need to work on your occlumency too.
How do we do that now that Umbridge knows about the room of requirement?
I hadn't thought of that. We'll need somewhere else to practice.
It's probably best to find an empty classroom every time we need one and change location every time we meet. We shouldn't take chances with Umbridge.
No, we shouldn't. She'll feel personally victimized by me teaching you occlumency.
You know she will. It's a plot against the Ministry.
Draco snorted, rolling his eyes, even though Harry couldn't see it.
Are you going to be okay, though? With not in your dormitory?
I certainly hope so, Draco replied, grimacing. He can't take house points from me without hurting his own house, so that's a plus. But that's about it. Having him in a position of power is definitely dangerous. I'm going to try and lie low.
Do that, Harry agreed. If he hurts you again, I might have to kill him with my bare hands, Umbridge or no Umbridge.
You could delegate the job to Fred and George, Draco joked. They seem to be eager for ideas.
I might mention it to them, Harry replied, and Draco couldn't tell whether he was joking or not.